So welcome everybody. Like I said, this is our webinar on AAS Gold Medal winners, of which we have three to talk about right now. I'm Diane Blazik. I'm the Executive Director for All America Selections, as well as National Garden Bureau. So National Garden Bureau is our nonprofit marketing organization, and we help promote AAS winners. AAS is a plant trialing organization. I have on this webinar Gail Paps from our office. Say hi, Gail. And she is helping us do a lot of the stuff behind the scenes and does all of our marketing. And I have a very special guest today. I don't know if you can see Flat Stanley. So Flat Stanley is going to join us during the webinar. I'll put him on my billboard. Try not to put a hole through his face or anything. But he's just our special guest for the day, and I've got him for the next week or so. I think it is time for us to introduce our panelist. And so let's see here. On my screen, I'm looking at this, and Mark Conlock is at the top. So we're going to start with Mark. But first, I always forget this, and Gail usually has to remind me. If anybody has questions, please put them in the chat, and we will answer your questions as we go along. And we're going to start with an introduction of our panelists. Then I will explain what the All America Selections trial is. And then we're going to dive right into talking about three very beautiful ornamental AAS winners. So Mark Conlock from Green Bay Botanic Garden, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. Mark Conlock, Director of Horticulture at Green Bay Botanical Garden. We're a garden in Green Bay, Wisconsin, about 23 acres of developed gardens, 23 acres of natural areas. And we show off a lot of annuals, perennials, trees, and shrubs, but we're very proud to be an All-America Selection display garden since 2006. And then a few years after that, we were asked to be judges. So we do judge the All-America Selections trials, and we're proud of our affiliation with the organization and happy to be here today to talk about the gold medal winners.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Okay, let's see here. Ken Har, you're next on my screen. I'm not doing alphabetical. I'm doing by how you appear on my screen. So Ken from Cicada, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Diane. I am Ken Har, and I too am located in Green Bay, Wisconsin, where the sunshine is kind of coming out. We're hoping for a warmer day today than we had this last couple of weeks. But I have been with Cicada for about going on 10 years now. But prior to that, I was with some other breeding companies. And actually, I was Mark's predecessor out at the Green Bay Botanical Gardens. But before that, I was a grower, had my own greenhouse, but been doing this for almost 50 years. So I've known Diane for a long time. It's always a pleasure to do anything for her that I can help with the AAS trials or anything to do with the National Garden Bureau. But thanks a lot for inviting me, Diane.
Sure, we're happy to. And as long as I've known you, as long as I've known Mark, I did not know that you were at the Green Bay Botanic Garden before. So I learned something new this week.
Mark's been there a lot longer than I was.
And he's still 20, you know?
That's right. That's right.
Okay, next on my screen is Tanya, and I hope I don't mispronounce your last name, Carvalho. Is that right?
Yes, it's Carvalho.
Okay, well, great. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me to be a part of this panel this morning, Diane. My name is Tanya Carvalho, as Diane mentioned, and I am the Territory Manager of Canada for Ball Flower Plant. And Ball Flower Plant is lucky enough to have one of the gold medal winners on the list today. So I'm very excited to be able to chat about that. Ball Flower Plant is corporately headquarters are in West Chicago. I reside up here just north of Toronto, and I've been at Ball for about 4.5 years now. And prior to that, I was at a local Ontario grower here by my home, Bradford Greenhouses, for about 13 years. And there I worked with production and retail concept planning, putting together retail programs for garden centers and retailers across the country. So super excited to be here today. Thank you so much, Diane.
Excellent. And last but not least is Michael. And I'm going to let you pronounce your own last name because I don't want to see. I should have asked this beforehand. My mistake. So Michael from Cicada, we will let you introduce yourself.
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Michael Weeby. I am Ken's counterpart over at Cicada. Ken is getting ready to, at some point, retire completely. I guess he started the process, but I hope it's another 10 years before he finishes the process of retirement. And Cicada, at the end of last summer, brought me on to ultimately replace him as technical product manager. So prior to that, I was with another company in substrates, working in rooting materials, Smithers Oasis Company, and was brought over here. So just those two positions for the last almost 10 years. So still relatively green, but very excited to learn more, and just really happy to be here this morning.
Well, in our industry, green is a good thing, right? So,
yes, it is.
just keep being green.
Yes,
so I just want to say to everybody on the webinar, I mean, these are the experts. You look at their experience and their knowledge, and I'm pretty sure that whatever you question our webinar attendees have about growing annuals, these four people will definitely be able to answer your questions. So as we move on, I do have a short presentation, and we're just going to play it by ear as far as how long it's going to stay on screen because there's such beautiful photos. And the first thing that I thought I should just give a broad overview, and I'll probably interject things throughout the webinar, but what is All America Selections? First of all, we're a nonprofit organization. We are a plant trialing organization, and we are celebrating our 90th anniversary this year, which is really hard to believe that, yeah, yay. The organization has been around for 90 years, and for the most part, doing things the same way that we did them back in 1932. So that's pretty awesome. One of the easiest ways that I think it is to explain what we do is to compare us to the Good Housekeeping Seal of Approval or Underwriter Laboratories. So both of these organizations test and trial products, most frequently like small home appliances. But once they are put through the paces in a typical home environment, maybe even treated brutally, like some of our plants are, Mother Nature sends down rain and heat and sleet and hail and everything else. But once these appliances or whatever it is through Good Housekeeping and Underwriter Laboratories perform and they do well, then the best of the best gets that seal of approval. So it's the same thing with All America Selections. Today, we're just talking about annuals. We've got annuals that are grown from seed and annuals that are grown from non-seed, a vegetative cutting. But we also have trials for edibles, vegetables. We also have a 3-winter trial for perennials. So that is the big overview. And the big deal is that sometimes we have the really best of the best, and those are our gold medal winners. So we have national winners and we have regional winners, and we also have gold medal. So gold medal means that a huge majority of the judges say, oh my gosh, this is the best thing since sliced bread. And that's what we have to talk about today. So from here, I think what we're going to do is turn it over to our Cicada friends, and we're going to talk about our first of 3 gold medal winners. This is called Zinnia Profusion Red Yellow Bicolor. And who wants to take it away? Ken, do you want to start and kind of talk about the Profusion series, since actually there are some other gold medal winners in the series?
Yes, I will. And thank you again, Diane, for having us here. Just a very quick background on Zinnia Profusions. They were first introduced into the US market way back in 1999. And since then, of all of the colors and varieties that have been introduced to the market, we have 7 AAS winners, of which the red yellow bicolor is the latest one, but it is also the gold medal winner, which there hadn't been one for a couple of years, well, several years prior to this. So we have within our category of profusions, we have cherry, orange, red, white, and now the red and yellow bicolor in the single flower types. And in the double profusions, we have deep salmon and double hot cherry, which are also AAS winners. So it's a series that's been around for quite some time, but continued to enable people to grow these, see how well they do in the landscape. All of the awards that they've gathered over the years is just a testament to the breeders of how well they continue this series. Profusions, when they first were introduced, when they first went into a breeding project, this is actually a cross, an intergenera cross between Zinnia elegans, which are the tall, big flowered zinnias like State Fair, and a smaller bushy type called Zinnia angustifolia. So the breeders combined these two, made some crosses, and the real main objective of this was to develop a zinnia that was resistant to powdery mildew. And as anybody who knows that has grown the elegance type, they will get powdery mildew rather easily in the hot, humid conditions of summer. Well, the profusions are entirely resistant to powdery mildew. So anything you grow is not going to get that disease on them, and they'll continue to flourish throughout the summer. So that was really the main objective. And there are a lot of other objectives that breeders have to look for. Number one is seed production. And so we always want to make sure that the variety produces enough seed for all the consumers out there. It does nobody any good to develop a really nice, pretty variety of flowers and then have virtually no seed for it. So that's number one. And I could get into a lot of other things that breeders really look for. But as far as the red and yellow bicolor, several years ago, the current market was demanding more and more bicolors in just about any kind of flower variety. And that's when the Zinnia plant breeder looked at what can we do with bicolors. And actually it took about somewhere around 5 to 6 years to develop the red and yellow bicolor to the specifications that we wanted it. And I remember seeing it along with some of the other people on the sales team. We wanted that flower right now, but it took another 4 years to bring it to market. And that's how plant breeders work. They want to make sure that all of the T's are crossed and all of the I's are dotted to make sure that when they are introduced to the market, that we have an outstanding variety to introduce into the profusion season. And we certainly hit it with the red and yellow bicolor. So the main objective really is introduce bicolors into the series, as well as making sure that they all have that powdery mildew disease resistance. Michael, want to add anything?
No, I think you nailed it, Ken. Thank you.
Yeah, that was really good information. And of course, we already have a question. This is wonderful. This is Earth Day, so of course we're going to talk about pollinators, and I know zinnias are great for pollinators. The specific question is, do they produce as much nectar for the pollinators as the older varieties? I mean, I would add in their pollen too. And then maybe you want to talk about the differences between single and double pollinators. I mean, me in my yard, I'm going to plant all different types because I think a wider variety will definitely be better for the pollinators. But have you guys done any measurements on nectar? I've never asked a breeder that question.
You know, that's a good question. I have never really, dealt with that before or seen it come up. But I do know that the wild species of any variety, including zinnias, will produce quite a bit of nectar because that's what they're adapted to do. Now, the single flowers will produce more pollen than the doubles. But the doubles have, of course, more petals. It doesn't mean there isn't nectar in there. It doesn't mean there isn't pollen. There's just a bit less of it than in the singles. So if you're looking at nectar producing flowers with more pollen, the single varieties are probably the way to go, which includes the red and yellow bicolor, then the doubles. But if you're looking for show in the landscape, the doubles are certainly going to produce more flower power in each individual flower than the singles do.
Great. And then another question, you can answer it, and then I'm going to follow up with a little bit more detail. Is this zinnia open pollinated?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so my follow-up to that, I knew what you were going to answer, is on the AAS website. So we have each AAS winner has its own page. If it says F1 after it, it's a hybrid. If it doesn't have F1, it's open pollinated. So that's just a little tip on when you're looking at things on the AAS website. So, okay, I think I want to show the next couple of slides because when this was entered into AAS, what the folks from Cicada were talking about is this bicolor and how stable it is and how vibrant it is. And then our judges, during the process of judging, started to see this amazing transformation that as the flowers age, they would go from this yellow with red center to maybe a rosy center to this orangey, salmonish outside on the petals. So, Michael, is it your turn, or Mark, do you want to talk about what you saw here? And I'm sorry that this photo wasn't the best one, but I still, I know that it's got some older flowers on there, but I still thought it was just really good about how it showed the various color transformation of this Zinnia Profusion red yellow bicolor.
Yeah, I can say what we saw, and then Michael, if he wants to add. Yeah, so you can see in this picture, it's kind of like getting multiple plants in one plant because you start with the red, yellow bicolor, but then you can see, like Gail mentioned, how it fades to all these different colors and shades of apricot and salmon, and it really looks spectacular. And then the newer flowers that are the yellow, red bicolor come up above them and hide, the old one. So you don't have to do any work, and you get all this flower power and the really neat changeover throughout the growth cycle. So it's really exciting to see all that. And that's what made it a spectacular plant, besides all the facts that it was disease resistant. It attracted pollinators because of the single floweredness of it. And it just had a nice compact mounded habit, a little bit more than some of the comparisons. And it was just a spectacular plant. But then that flower power difference change really made it be above and beyond and helped get it to the gold medal status.
Yeah, Ken, correct me if I'm wrong, but we see this out of our out of the singular colors in this series as well. As you see that kind of that color deepen as the flowers age, and specifically with the bicolors, you'll notice that that red almost bleeds wide and creates that that darker, deeper, the purples and pinks into the yellows. And an important thing to note on the point of pollination is the more colors you have in your garden, the more pollinators you're going to attract. So, the yellows and reds are the coverall, right? The coverall colors for almost all pollinators. But the more of a variety of colors you have, the more you're going to attract overall.
Excellent. And somebody has a question about, does it need deadheading?
That is a very good question. You can if you want to, but as Mark mentioned, and Michael too, we have a kind of a loose term that may or could be inappropriate, but it's called burying its dead. And what happens is as the new flowers emerge above the existing flowers, they tend to cover everything that's there. So yes, you will have seed pods or seed head clusters, but the new growth tends to hide all that. So it's a matter of really if you want to or not. I never have deadheaded zinnias in my yard, and I've had profusions for years and years, simply because, and this is just a personal anecdote or observation that I have, we have backyard deer, and they will eat a lot of things, but they never touch my zinnias. Never.
So they won't deadhead them for you then.
No. They even ate marigolds before they ate the zinnias.
Yeah. So I wanted to show this picture also. I mean, this picture shows the brand new flowers, and then the other picture does show it as they are starting to age. But just to show that they will do just as well as a container as they will in the landscape. So that one I wanted to show. Gail is also posting in the chat some of our other judges' statements that, again, we put on our website just so that you can kind of hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. Not calling you a horse, Mark, but yeah, so we like to add the judges' comments to the website. And then another thing about our trials is every AAS entry is trialed next to one or two comparisons. And this picture actually was taken up there next to you, Tanya. It was at the University of Guelph. And so this shows the entry, this Zinnia Profusion in the middle, and then the two comparison varieties. So what they were trying to look for was, you know, the original yellow color, the red center, and was it uniform, and how many flowers was it, did it produce, you know, the floriferousness, so to speak. So that's what it actually looked like in the AAS trial. So any final comments from anyone before we move to our next gold medal winner? Oh, we have a question. And then I have a follow-up to it. So the question is, do they well started in small plants and transplanted? And my answer is absolutely yes. For the last couple of years, I have started them indoors. I'm not a professional. I have like one little grow light in my basement. And so absolutely, they do well. They're quite durable. The only tip I have is if you happen to travel out of town and leave your husband in charge of watering, don't let him overwater them, because that is kind of bad. But they do bounce back when mom comes back in town and waters them the proper amount. So no offense to my husband, but he just loved my zinnias a little too much. I gave him too much water, but they are very durable. So trust me, if I can make them survive, you can make them survive. Anything else then on this one? And then before we move to the next?
I was just going to say this is a really great picture, Diane, because it shows, you know, like the entry and how amazing it is compared to the, you know, adjacent ones. So you can really get an idea of what it looks like compared to some of the other zinnias.
Yes. So one more question, where to buy? We have links on our website. There's a where to buy button on every single AAS winner. For the most part, that is seed sources of where to buy them online. Ken or Michael, do you want to give are there any other major retailers, or do you just say, hey, look everywhere, they're probably going to be available no matter where you go?
Yeah, you know, that's probably the best answer because when we first introduced this variety last year, we were able to get it out to some later summer and fall sales, especially in the southern states. And it was such a great seller for everybody in the limited amounts that were out there that this year, when we showed it off again at some of our different events around the country, everybody was buying into it. So I would say that any of the big box stores, many of your top end garden center stores will absolutely have the red and yellow bicolor. I just think you're going to see this just about everywhere you go.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, so we'll all get to enjoy it. And next up then, we have Petunia, Bee's Knees. So Tanya, this is your opportunity to talk about this. And yes, please note that I put a cute little bee up in the corner because I love the name of this flower, of this plant. So what do you want to tell us about? When the folks at Bellflower Plant were doing the breeding work, what were they looking for? What were their aims? How did this come about?
So Bee's Knees came about. There was a strong need that we saw in the market for really crisp, clean, saturated yellow. And by saying crisp and clean, what I mean is a lot of yellows in the marketplace will be a buttery, creamy tone, or they will have brown veining in them that will give them almost a dirty look, or they'll have definite green undertones, which when put into the landscape, you start to lose that yellow because of all the foliage in containers and in the landscape. So it was really important to bring a true yellow to the market. One of the largest feedbacks, biggest complaints, I guess, that we hear from growers and from home gardeners is that yellow petunias really struggled over the longevity of the summer. They didn't really like rain. They don't really like high wind. And pardon my French, but they get snotty. And by snotty, they get that, we all know petunias are sticky, but when they get wet with rain, they tend to just deteriorate so quickly. So it was really important to work with a very strongly branched plant to start off with, and then a very saturated, clean yellow. So in 2016, we knew we had something here. So we started to put the bee's knees, at the time it didn't have a name, put it out into one of our 19 trial sites across North America. So in the United States, there are, I believe it's 17 trial sites across the United States. And we have 2 here in Canada, one in Ontario and one in British Columbia. And these are trial sites that are not open to the public. Of course, they're open to our breeding team, our selection team, which I'm a part of, and the growers that are taking part in the growing process for us. Where we put these trials, we put them in baskets, we put them in containers, we put them in the ground, we grow them in the greenhouse under extreme conditions where it can get very, very hot. I know there's been a couple times I've been in a greenhouse reading some of these trials, and it's 50 degrees Celsius. It is hot. We really put them to the test before we get them out into the public gardens and the AAS trial sites. So as Ken had mentioned, it is a long process of trialing to get to the point of execution and finally bringing it to market. So Bee's Knees did very, very well through all of our trial sites, and then hence bringing it to market for 2021.
Excellent. And you brought up something that I didn't mention earlier with the AAS trials. So we have anywhere from 24 to 40 different trials throughout US and Canada. So yeah, when it goes into an AAS trial, it has a lot of very critical horticulture experts looking at them. Some are growing in ground, some are growing in container. To think back to the Profusion red yellow bicolor that was trialed in ground. Bee's Knees was trialed in containers, but like Tanya says, it definitely does well in ground also. And I'm going to zip forward a couple slides, but I do want to come back. So Tanya, this is what you were talking about. I had mentioned comparisons. These are 2 of the varieties that Bee's Knees was trialed against, because they were wanting a deeper yellow. So when we compared it to some of the other yellows currently on the market, they were a much softer yellow. So as you can see, the Bee's Knees, which is here on this one that I'm circling, I don't want to say it's on your left or right in case something is turned around here. But this one right here is the Bee's Knees, and you can tell that the comparisons were a much paler yellow. So for anybody wanting this good, vibrant yellow in the garden, this is the choice.
Yes, and I see, because I get to travel all across Canada extensively, and I do attend trial sites into the US as well with the territory managers down in the United States. So even though my focus is Canada, I do get to travel throughout the continent and visit different trial sites. One thing that I noted is earlier in the spring, and maybe in the slightly darker conditions in the Pacific Northwest and in British Columbia, we do tend to see a very dark yellow. Still no green, still no brown veining or anything, just really, really dark. And as we move across the continent into some higher light levels, like we would see typically in June here in Ontario and the Pacific, the Atlantic Northeast, that coast, we do tend to see it even get brighter in color, if that's even possible. So depending on your light conditions, you're going to see different tones of this saturated yellow. And I think another thing that really makes it pop is it has a darker foliage. So sometimes a petunia will have a very chartreuse, almost vibrant green foliage. Bee's Knees is very dark, a rich saturated green. And that green holds its color. So just depending on your light level, your yellow will be brighter or deeper.
Great. Mark, do you want to talk a little bit about what you saw in your trials in Green Bay, Wisconsin?
Yes, I want to affirm Tanya's conclusions. She stole my thunder a little bit, but I always look as the judge look to make sure that what the breeder claims is true. I'm looking for a great garden plant is a baseline for everything. And then, looking into the breeder's claims against the comparison. So that was what was so awesome about this plant, is that it really did, show up as the yellowest plant of everything. And I was going to say the same thing, that the other interesting thing is the foliage was greener. So in Green Bay, Wisconsin, green and gold. I mean, how can you lose with that for the Packers, right?
He said.
Yeah, and then like you said, sometimes the other one, it held up to all the weather conditions, like I call it bedraggled sometimes after a rainstorm, or at the end of the year, they're kind of like all skimpy and scrawny, and you've really seen the weather affect them, but not so with bee's knees. And the last thing is that, it was vigorous and mounding and kind of spilled over the containers that we trialed them in, and really like filled them out completely and lasted and bloomed throughout the whole season. So that's why it was such a spectacular plant. It lived up to all the breeders' claims. Plus it was a spectacular garden plant for everyone to grow, homeowners, anyone, that wants to grow it, and should be a good seller for all the greenhouses and commercial growers.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the spilling factor. So the way that it looks here in the hanging basket, and then I love this too, like over a retaining wall. I think that is gorgeous. And so, Mark, you brought something up. I think around the Green Bay Packers Stadium all summer, this is the only thing you need to plant, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'll have to go talk to Mark Murphy when I see him at the custard stand next.
Excellent. So Tanya or Mark, do you want to talk a little bit about care? We didn't talk about this with the zinnia, but does it need a fertilizer? Should you, be using a slow release or a liquid fertilizer? Does it not need a fertilizer? What about deadheading on this one? Who wants to take that?
I can take it away, Mark, and you can jump in if something might be differing from the conditions in your part of the continent. So this plant is structured when it branches, when it grows, to kind of do this. So what this enables it to do is, typically a petunia will split open in heavy rains because it's not branching, kind of crossing over like this. Bee's knees does do this, so you don't get a lot of splitting, which is what Diane's showing here in this spillover. I mean, if you were to get a split on that, you'd have big gapping holes of just green. And I wanted to bring that up. It's kind of like a weather tolerant petunia. So pre-launch year, I did do extensive containers in ground and baskets of bee's knees at my home. And what I do is, when I'm building my containers or my combinations at home or putting them in the ground, I use a slow release fertilizer right at the onset. Majority of your growers are already going to have that in your soil compound that you purchase it in, whether it's a container or a 4-inch pot or quart. So adding more additional slow release fertilizer. This is an aggressive yellow petunia, like Mark mentioned. So I find that feeding mine in May and then feeding them again in the beginning of July really took my plants right through this season. Deadheading, all petunias need deadheading pretty much. If I know Ken had mentioned a term we use often in it sounds terrible, burying the dead. But because bee's knees is on the aggressive side, it does continue to branch and mound and trail. So it too will bury its dead. I'm very particular in my garden, so I do go out and deadhead a lot and end up with the petunia sticky fingers. In ground, I basically just let mine go. I didn't deadhead, I just let it continue to bury its dead all summer long. In my containers, depending on the size, I had both big 20-inch containers and then smaller 12-inch containers. What I find is, about the 3rd week of July, I go in and do an aggressive haircut on all the components, not just the petunias. My kids call it the ugly stage, because I go in and I just people are always like, can I cut off an inch? Oh, let me tell you, I cut off like 3.5, 4 inches. I take it almost up to the basket rim or the container rim. And what you're doing is you're just bringing more life back into that plant. So don't ever be afraid at your home gardens to just really get in there and give it a haircut. I mean, I wouldn't go 4 months without a haircut. So, well, I did during COVID and it wasn't good. So you just get in there, give it a haircut, and you're going to actually add health and longevity to that plant. So go in and trim away. slow release fertilizer at the onset and then mid-season again. And yeah, that's basically all the care you need. And water it, not as much as Diane's husband maybe, but water it as much as needed for your climate in your area of North America. Here in Ontario, I have to water every single morning at about 5:30. So yeah, that's basic care.
That's excellent. And what's the size, if you've got one plant, what's the height and spread of bee's knees?
So I find that the one plant in the ground is going to give me probably anywhere from 8 to 12 inches of height. I've seen it come up nice and tall in a beautiful, warm, kind of moderate summer. In a cooler summer, you might be closer to the 8 inches in height. And then spread wise, you're going to get almost a 2-foot radius spread. At the Guelph trials, I believe it was in 2020, we had them in ground that year at the old Guelph trial location. And I believe Roger planted 6 plants, and it was just beautiful, breathtaking display. And it was a wide girth, probably up to 6 feet spread with those 6 plants. So very, very generous in the ground.
And you're mentioning Roger Shantz at University of Guelph. He is another one of our volunteer judges. So thank you for mentioning him. If we could, we would mention all 90 judges, but that might get a little boring to list all their names. Their names are on our website. And trust me, without our judges, the AAS trials would not even be a thing. So Tanya, you mentioned something about combinations. So I wanted to show this, and maybe you can talk a little bit before we move on to our third gold medal winner, but talk a little bit about putting bee's knees in combination plantings. What goes well with bee's knees besides everything?
So the year pre-launch year when I planted them at my house, and since launch, I continue to use them at my house. They just pop. It's incredible. So I mixed them extensively with other product lines. So I'm a big pollinator fan, so I like to use lantana a lot. I love lantana. I think it brings the pollinator party, and mixing a vibrant yellow with any color of a lantana is fantastic. And there are lantanas on the market that are beautifully branched as well. So it just lifts the plants up. They look great in ground and baskets. Salvias, I've mixed with calibrachoas, petunias, angelonias. So all of these are vegetative items, by the way. I might not have mentioned that. Ballflower plant is a vegetative breeder. We are not on the seed side, we're on the weedy side. So we are vegetative. So everything that I'm mixing with is vegetative, and sometimes with perennials as well. I use a lot of bee's knees at my mom's doing her gardening with her, and she has extensive perennial beds. And because sometimes the perennials go through those transitions where there's not a lot of color, you throw in a bee's knees and it just makes those perennials pop even more. So it plays very, very well with a plethora of other annuals. Don't be afraid to mix it unless you're picking up something that's extremely compact. So always read your tags or ask your garden center staff for assistance. Make sure you're not grabbing something that's extremely compact, because the bee's knees might eat it. You want to make sure you're picking something with medium to high vigor.
Excellent. Okay, and we do have a question. I'm going to show you, I guess, 2 or 3 different pictures, Tanya. So for the bee's knees, do you have any idea what size container this is? Is it probably like an 18 to 20?
That's probably a 12-inch.
That's probably a 12-inch. Okay, and how many bee's knees plants are in there?
I would say in that container, there's going to be 2 lobelias, 2 verbenas, and probably 3 bee's knees.
Okay. And then what about in this one? How many bee's knees would be in that one? And do you know what size that hanging basket is?
That hanging basket is probably going to be an 11 or 12-inch. And again, it would be 3 bee's knees.
Excellent. Okay, Margaret, there's your answer. Anything else then on bee's knees before we move to the begonia? We got a lot of bees here.
I know Ken and Michael had mentioned where to purchase, and the same thing is going to be said for the bee's knees. It was very widely accepted by retailers across the continent, your big box retail garden centers, as well as your grocery chain garden centers, as well as your independent garden centers. I get to travel across Canada quite extensively and into the US, and I don't think I've been to a grower yet that doesn't have bee's knees. So it will be hitting the market in all those different avenues of garden centers.
Excellent. So the one place it will not be or should not be is in seed form. So if you go onto Amazon and they say we have bee's knees seed, don't believe them.
They don't.
Do not believe them. Don't believe everything you see on Amazon when it comes to gardening supplies. Just saying. Okay, that's awesome. Okay, sorry, little bee, we're gonna say goodbye to you, but we do have somebody else here that's kind of cute up in that corner, and that's our little Viking. So Ken and Michael, now it's time to go back to you guys. Cicada has a second gold medal, which is Begonia Viking Explorer Rose on Green.
Okay, yeah. I was kind of involved in the valuations of the Viking series ever since it began. And just a little background on it, the reason why it was named Viking is because this was developed at our Denmark location in Europe. So every year I was fortunate enough to travel to Denmark and go through all of the evaluations of all the projects that they're breeding on. But I remember seeing this one that really took everybody's interest from the very beginning. The Viking series is a large hybrid begonia. And we recognized years ago that as people were moving away from gardening in flower beds where you would put a lot of, like 6-packs out in your garden, to more container gardening on your patio, porches, balconies, hanging baskets, everything, that there was a need for larger plants that could sell well in the market. And the Viking series came out of that concept. So initially the Vikings series is an upright hybrid begonia that just produces a lot of flowers. And the other AAS winner in this category is the Viking Red on Chocolate. Has the most chocolate deep bronze leaf you will see. And when you see the red and the rose color up against that chocolate, it is very striking. It shows it up very well. But while we were doing all of these selections, the breeder showed us one that was growing laterally. So instead of growing upright, it was like growing outward, more of a spreading type. And at first, it was just growing way too big, even for what we were looking for. So he was doing more crosses, more selections, until a couple of years ago when I was in Denmark. We were looking at what was his final, selection. And we all said, there you go. That's it. And we named it Explorer because it tends to grow outward, like it's exploring outward. And that's what we have. We have two colors, the rose on green, which was the award winner, and we have red on green. So that's just a little bit of a background, but you will see these are really more suited for container gardening, whether it's in hanging baskets or a patio pot or window boxes. They will just continue to flower all summer. And like all hybrid begonia or fibrous rooted begonias, these will tolerate a lot of sun, a lot of heat, and somewhat dry conditions. You don't want to let them dry out completely, but definitely you can let them go on the dry side, and they will do remarkably well in your landscape, whether it's on the patio or in a window box or hanging basket. The one thing that really struck me, as Tanya said, we travel around the country looking at a lot of greenhouses, a lot of products going into retail. And when you see begonias in hanging baskets, they eventually get so big that they cover the hook. This product, the Viking Explorer, will never get above the hook. So it'll continue to spread outward as the season goes along. earlier flowering, compared to some of the other series, but that usually doesn't involve the consumer that much, except to say that these are going to come into retail stores with a lot of flowers on it, large flowers that continue to bloom all summer long. Great weather resistance, as far as holding up to rain, the heat, drought, all of that. So we're just really, really gung ho and high on the Viking Explorer as a new product form in the begonia category.
And one of the things that the judges commented on about the flowers being held nicely above the foliage, and that in all breeding work is very important. I think everybody would agree. Is it's great if it has tons of flowers, but if they're if it's like the foliage, the leaves, and everything are overgrowing the flowers, that doesn't work. So in the breeding trials, those go out the door, and you try to focus on the ones like this where you're getting all the flowers held above the foliage.
Absolutely, and that was one of the objectives that the begonia breeder was looking for, was flowers that held up not only above the foliage, but rather than just at the tips of the new growth, you got it continually blooming all along the stem, and it stays real nice and full up on top. It doesn't have that, what I tend to call that male pattern baldness, look, where there's no flowers at the top, they're all on the side.
I have never heard that used in terms of flowers, but I guarantee you I'm going to use that all the time now.
You're welcome to.
Okay. We have a picture here, and this is not Mark's trial. It was somebody else's trial, but I just wanted to show again how all the AAS entries are grown next to comparisons. So you can see that this is the entry over here. Look at the way that it has so many more flowers than the comparison. So again, this is part of what made it an AAS Gold Medal winner. So Mark, I don't know if you want to comment on that.
I was going to say this picture really shows what Ken was talking about, how the entry has the flowers all throughout the whole plant, and the other comparison you can see where it has kind of the green top. So, I mean, it is just amazing how much flower power it has when you look at all the pictures. And I like to call how it explores and drapes over like the flowers at eyeball level. It's like where you can actually see them and appreciate them. So that's an interesting thing. And it really, the glossy foliage of almost all begonias, but it pops the flowers too because of that nice look to it. And that leaf means that it is insect and disease resistant, so you won't have issues with that. And like one of the judges used a good term I liked that I read on the website. It said long season integrity, which is going to mean that it looks good all season long. So it's something that you can have there blooming all season and rely on it throughout the whole year.
Yeah,
I'm going to use that too, Mark.
Long season integrity. Yeah, exactly. So Ken or Michael, would one of you like to talk about tips for the home owner, the home gardener? In-ground baskets, containers, do you deadhead it? Do you have to fertilize it? What are some of your thoughts there?
Go ahead, Michael.
Well, I think as far as in-ground baskets, containers, we touched on that a little bit just by the unique trailing habit of Viking Explorer. Baskets, containers are probably the top ones for this variety. Both rose on green as well as red on green. I would do fine in the bed. However, I think where it really shines is where it can demonstrate, that cascade of color, both from the top all the way down to the ends of the branches. As far as care, Ken mentioned that a little bit. You don't want to let it dry. It is relatively hardy, but you do not want to let it dry all the way out. It doesn't need quite as much water as Diane, you mentioned, and Tanya, you also mentioned Diane's husband. Maybe, some people like to feed their plants like they feed their pets, in the morning, lunch, and in the evening. But no, you don't need to overdo it like that. But you can't let it starve, especially in the hotter regions. I have heard some a notion that The darker foliage begonias are a little bit more sun hardy than or heat resistant, light intensity resistant than some of the lighter green foliage varieties. From what we can tell over at Cicada, that might be the truth, but it's too close to tell. I think our green foliage varieties do just as well in the sun as our darker foliage varieties under intense direct sun, as long as they're watered appropriately. So as far as fertilizer, Ken, if you can jump in there, I think a slow release would be totally fine.
Absolutely. What I would do if you've got if you buy a basket or a container already with a full-grown Viking Explorer in it, it may have some slow release fertilizer in it, but I would certainly add some more as the season goes on, because all of the nutrients, all of the water that plant is going to get is contained within that container. So it's not drawing anything from a bed or from the ground that it might be planted in. So yes, a slow release fertilizer according to label directions would be recommended for these.
So I have a question, because I tend to just use the water soluble and water it in. So let's say that I've bought a 12-inch hanging basket and I'm going to keep it in there, which might be a mistake. Maybe I should transplant it. But if I'm not transplanting it, how do I add additional slow release fertilizer to my plant midsummer? What do you suggest?
Well, the biggest thing that I've seen people have problems with slow release is that, especially when you've got a large plant, is that they will sprinkle it on the plant, and then the fertilizer, the little prills, do not get down to the soil itself. Sometimes they're just sitting on top of the leaves. And when that fertilizer is in the sun and it gets watered either from somebody irrigating it or from rainwater, that fertilizer prill does break down, and you will get concentrated fertilizer right on the foliage, and that will burn it. So the biggest thing is to get that slow release down to the soil. So whether you have to lift up the foliage and put it underneath, or spread it out and put it through it, make sure that the slow release hits the soil, and then water it in, and you should be fine after that. The other thing that I see is that people over fertilize with slow release, and even though it does break down gradually, if you get too much in it, when it does break down, you'll get over fertilization, and you can burn the plants that way too. So the biggest thing is follow the label directions. If it says a tablespoon per 10-inch pot, that's what you do. Don't add anything more.
Good tips. Very good tips. One of the questions we have is what it was trialed against, asking, was it trialed against a dragon wing? And the answer is yes, it was trialed against dragon wing red, as well as big begonia rose greenleaf. That information is always on our website. But one of the things we did not talk about is the size of the plant. I mean, you can kind of tell with the pictures, but if you have one plant, what's the width that the begonia Viking would grow to?
Under ideal conditions, and that's like, it's going to grow to a different height and spread in Green Bay than it is in Charlotte, North Carolina, or even in Florida, because it's a longer growing season. But generally, the plant height is going to be around 20 to 22 inches, something like that. The height and the spread can be as much as 2 feet to 3 feet across, depending on the length of the season. So it's a sizable plant. There's no doubt about it. So you have to plan accordingly as to what you're going to plant it in. That particular container, it has 2 plants in it, because that was taken in Denmark. It has 2 plants in it, and that's in a 13-inch hanging basket.
Excellent. Okay, so Ken, you said 2 plants. This is from seed. So you're telling us that two tiny little begonia seeds can create this much flower power?
That's absolutely correct. It is, for the consumer, they don't have to worry about it, but it's a little bit of a long-term crop for growers. But the result is this. Now, this plant, the photo was taken in mid-August, so it's been, out on that pergola for a while.
And yes, I have heard that begonias are a long crop, but it is a seed variety. It is available as seed. Like I'm in Chicago, I'm zone 5. So if I want to plant this outside around mid-May, when would I start it indoors?
Usually around the end of January, the 1st of February, because just even as a seedling, you don't even get it up to enough size for like 8 to 10 weeks. Then you transplant it into your final container and it grows for another 10 weeks, 12 weeks after that.
Okay, that's enough of a challenge. I'm doing it. I'm going to
Yeah.
try it next year.
All right.
As
All
long as
right.
my husband doesn't overwater while I'm gone. Oh, poor guy. I'm going to circle back on the zinnias. We didn't talk about the size on the zinnias at all. So if you guys want to kind of talk about the height and width or spacing on the profusion zinnia.
That's I did think of that just as we were talking about the height and spread of the begonias. But again, and this is going to be under whatever the local environment is like. But generally, the zinnias grow to about 12 to 18 inches. And so on the 12-inch side, on the lower side, that's like where I live. It could get up to 14 inches in a ground bed or in a container. But in the south, yeah, it's going to get closer to 18 inches tall. And then you're going to have about the same spread, but maybe a little bit wider. So if it gets up to 18 inches tall, it may be 2 feet across. If it gets up to 14 inches tall, it's going to be about, 16 inches across. So, in that height wise, 14 to 18 inches spread is going to be 20 to 24 inches.
So don't plant them too close because
don't plant them too close. No, they take a certain amount of, intermingling from plant to plant, but I would certainly not plant them any closer than 12 to 14 inches on center, more like 14 inches.
Great. I mean, it sounds like all three of these AAS winners are quite vigorous, will spread. I mean, not excessively so. I don't want to imply that at all. And they're annuals, so that's awesome. You'll get color all summer long for all of them. Well, one more question. Begonia seeds, how small are they?
They are so small that we actually have to put a clay pellet around them to see them. They're one of the smallest seeds in all of the annual selections or offerings on the market. So yes, they are small. They'll come pelleted, and you'll get these tiny little BBs that you sow, and then once you water it, that clay pellet dissolves right away and exposes the tiny little seed to moisture and the soil.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, the pelleting, because I know a lot of people have questions about that. But yeah, it just dissolves away and it's all good.
Yep.
And one more question about the profusion zinnia. Do they need to be pinched in order to branch?
No, they do not. They are self-branching. That's one of the things that breeders are always looking for. I call it the 3 Bs, better basal branching. And every variety that you come out onto the market, if you don't have the 3 Bs, well, why are you introducing it? So almost in all cases, any new varieties, any new introductions have great basal branching, and so they do not have to be pinched. You can if you want to, and I have seen people do it, but what it really just does is delay flowering, and it's not necessary.
Right. And that's basal as in BASAL,
SAL,
not IL like the herb.
That's right.
Right.
That's
right.
right. That's
And
correct.
And you just said something else that we like to talk about here is all the new breeding work, all these new varieties that are coming out. The breeders are trying to do everything possible to make it easier for us as home gardeners to be successful.
Oh,
So yeah, you don't need to deadhead anymore for the most part, you know, and you
yeah.
don't need to pinch it. You just plant it and enjoy. I mean, that should be like our slogan, plant it and enjoy anymore.
Right, right. As Tanya well knows, on the vegetative side, so many new varieties are coming out that yes, they may be pollinators, but the deadheading is no longer necessary unless you really want to do it. I mean, I tend to do it on my containers with petunias. I'm always going out there and picking off the old blooms, but anymore, it's not that necessary anymore. To her point with the bee's knees, I have seen those in just about every greenhouse I go to. This is a great variety that was introduced by Ball, and like the Vikings, like the zinnias, you're going to see them everywhere. And so all of these varieties, I think, are going to be picked up by every major box store out there, as well as some of the second tier chains as well.
Yes, we agree. They're AAS winners, so why would they not pick them up? Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. Well, we've gone over an hour. You know, it happens every time. It's so easy to fill an hour talking about all this wonderful stuff and hearing tips from our experts. So let's see here. Oh dear, we've got somebody with a question. Does AAS maintain a seed bank for previous year winners? We I'm going to say in general terms, no, we do not. For our AAS display gardens, we have a special program where we send seed out every year for 5 years when it's a seed winner. But I can get some additional information for you, John Baldwin. I will email you with a little bit more detail since we're going over time. So with that, I am going to thank our panelists for your time, and I thank all of our attendees for your questions and your engagement. This is the perfect time of year. It's Earth Day. Go out and start making Mother Earth happy by planting all these AAS winners and wonderful annuals and edibles and perennials and everything else. So with that, unfortunately, we have to close it. Flat Stanley is saying goodbye. And thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend.